Commercial credit bureau CreditorWatch is forecasting a rise in court cases and insolvencies next month as the rubber hits the road and stimulus packages, including JobKeeper and Home Builder, dry up. According to their February business risk review, there has been a 61% jump in monthly external administration since January, the highest rise in 12 months. Joining us to unpack this further is CreditorWatch CEO Patrick Coughlan. Welcome to the Urban Developer, Patrick.
Thanks for having me. Great to be along.
So, mate, right from the outset, how would you currently describe the broader risk of insolvencies to the property and the construction sector in Australia?
Look, I think we're in a phenomenal position. Regardless of whether you compared it to March last year or June or September, along the way, all of those sort of high points of stress in 2020, we're certainly in a position that no one really expected us to be in. While there's a high increase in administrations from Jan to Feb, if you actually zoom out from that, the Feb 2021 insolvency numbers are still down about 50% compared to Feb 2020, which was pre-COVID. So certainly no alarm bells ringing at this stage.
Okay, and so where do you then perceive, the greatest risks as they exist to be? And I guess, how do you think these kind of risks transpire across the sectors?
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, at the moment, the obvious risks that jump out, the obvious sectors that are doing it really tough are retail, which is, to be honest, was doing it tough before COVID came along. Hospitality, accommodation, tourism, exposed industries. However, both of those industries are roaring back into sort of neutral or positive territory. So that's a really good thing to see. What we will find though is we'll really start to get a true sense of the economy, but also individual industries, and of course locations as well is going to become really important from April onwards, because we've got a huge amount of stimulus coming to an end, supportive packages from both private and government at the end of March. So, April onwards is really the important one to look at.
Okay, and so I'm interested then to get a sense of how government stimulus, how important that has been, and what the likely impact of these measures being removed insofar as administrations are concerned.
Yeah, so of course, just recapping, if we look at last year, we obviously had the introduction of things like JobKeeper and JobSeeker, which had a huge impact and have saved, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of jobs and tens of thousands of businesses from going into administration. Furthering that, we had bank support, as well as, of course, the safe harbour provisions that were introduced that essentially allowed companies out there to trade insolvent. That insolvency protection came to an end for most businesses at the end of December. And then there's some small business support in place through to the end of March. So all of that's essentially coming to an end in March, or being, wound down even further than it was before. So what we find is we move from a really synthetic economy, a synthetic environment that wasn't real, into a real environment. However, despite that, we're in such a great place from an economic and a health perspective that we're almost back at what I would call pre-COVID trading conditions, and we're seeing that across the board for almost all industries.
I think one of the things our audience is really interested in is the construction sector, contractors, subcontractors, suppliers, the health and the viability of those segments. Can you just talk to that?
Yeah, definitely. So look, if we, what we do, we actually capture a huge amount of data from, dozens and dozens of sources, private, public, government. So things like ASIC and the Australian Business Register, the obvious ones, court actions from around Australia. And then we've got our own, what we call proprietary data sources. So we've got 50,000 customers, 50,000 companies across Australia that use us. We can then report on any company or business in Australia and look at it from an industry perspective. So I promise I will get to answer your question properly, but I just want to paint a picture of the sort of data that we're getting through into our bureau that allows us to make these sort of predictions and show how specific industries are trading. One of the really key data sources that we get is essentially receivables or trade credit invoices that are coming through from the likes of age trial balances being uploaded by our customers, who are all suppliers, and also from our small business customers in the form of Xero and MYOB accounting software integration. So we can actually pull almost live feed of how businesses are paying our customers. So with all of that, we aggregate it all, anonymize it, and we're able to report at a company level, but also at an industry level. So if we were to look at construction, construction performed extremely well through the pandemic, and continues to perform really strongly, which is really important. Typically, construction, and we're talking the whole supply chain. So, all of those little segments that you mentioned fall under what we would call construction industry, but then we've got some adjacent industries like the hire and rental industry. Both of those would normally be one of the riskier industries, which is probably not a surprise. However, it flipped itself through 2020 and into 2021, and we saw construction paying their bills essentially at record levels not seen before, which is fantastic to hear and see. We've also had a significant reductions in insolvencies along the way as well. Comparing Feb 20 to Feb 21, we've seen a slight increase in the time it's taking for the construction industry to pay their bills, but certainly nothing that should be concerning. And then if we look at sort of January to February numbers of this year, it is extremely flat. There's been a couple of days increase, and that's the same for that hire and rental industry as well. So from my perspective, your industry is performing extremely well. There's been great support from the government. There's always those high level collapses that we see that probably draw a lot of attention away from the fact that the industry is really healthy. So yeah, I think the overall consensus is it's really positive. It's great. It's a great industry to be in, which is not always the case, as I'm sure you know.
No, and I'm sure that would come as a surprise to many in the industry as well. I know it's buoyant, but the idea or the impact of what's happened, has started to transpire through. So how do you see this all playing out over the next 12 months? You've got stimulus measures being sort of pulled back. You've got the industry largely, buoyant, and there's pockets of concern or risk, I guess, in relation to that. From 2021, 22 and beyond, how do you see the construction sector playing out from your perspective at CreditorWatch?
Yeah, look, it's there's a lot of uncertainty out there, of course. I don't want to sit here and paint a real rosy picture. I also don't want to sit here and be really negative, because that's that's not going to help anyone. And I think what we've seen is the start of probably a trend back to normal numbers, right? And I'm talking about insolvencies, right? On a monthly basis, pre-pandemic, we were having probably 700 to 800 insolvencies a month. Through the pandemic, we were down to 300s, 400s, so half, right? We know that in a normal year, a normal trading year, normal trading conditions within reason, it's all relative, of course, there's an expectation that companies fail, and that's the way economics work. That's the way capitalism works, and companies ultimately have to be allowed to fail. So what I think we will see over the next 4 to 6 months is an increase in insolvencies back up to pre-COVID levels, right? Back up to those 700, 800 insolvencies administrations a month. What will that look like specifically in the construction industry? I still think that they will follow a similar, national or, total industry trend. It will go up, definitely, because there will be smaller pockets, like you mentioned, that are doing it tough. There are naturally businesses out there that just go, I've had enough. And there are businesses out there that, collapse as a result of cash flow. And that could be off the back of a larger project going under. It could just be the area, the geography they find themselves in. We know that, tourism industry in in Queensland, and particularly northern Queensland, is really struggling. So if there's any sort of exposure to industries like that that are going to be suffering, then there could be a bit of a knock-on effect there.
Well, that's excellent insights. I'm sure a bit of a sigh of relief from our audience as well in terms of the data underlying this. Patrick, thank you so much for your time. We'll talk to you again shortly.
Thanks for having me on. Great to chat.
Cheers.